and this is the Laura Flanders Show, a TV and radio program that shines a light on the solutions of tomorrow today. We report on the people and movements driving systemic change from the worlds of politics, arts, and entrepreneurship. Welcome. Pilgrims and Indians, the mad myth of the grateful colonized person, they're just some of the stories that distort or erase the true relationship between indigenous peoples and their white colonizers. Over the years, some of these have been challenged. The words genocide and colonization are no longer totally taboo in the Thanksgiving story, but similar myths created by colonizers continue to have serious consequences for indigenous peoples, everywhere from the courts of law to Hollywood, and as we'll hear today, to the relationship of the U.S. government with Native nations. In the midst of a national reckoning with white supremacy and our history, Native people from tribes across the continent are demanding a new relationship on new terms. In 2021, a group of Native organizers traveled with a 25-foot totem pole from the Lummi Nation in Washington State all the way to Washington, D.C., stopping for ceremonies and events in communities and sacred sites under threat. They called their journey the Red Road to D.C., and along the way, the totem pole's carvers invited people to place their hands on the pole and let it carry their hopes, dreams, and demands to the U.S. Capitol. Through my good friend Judith LeBlanc, director of the Native Organizers Alliance, which co-organized the Red Road trip, I had an opportunity to travel along part of the totem pole journey. In this episode, I'll speak with Judith and a number of other organizers to learn about where the Red Road to the future might lead us, all of us, if we followed it. Judith LeBlanc, what a pleasure to have you with us. My thanks, first off, for inviting me to come with you on some of this extraordinary totem pole journey. The Red Road to Washington, D.C. was a huge experience for me. The totem pole journeys have happened before, but this one was special. How so, and how did you get the idea of teaming up with the Lummi carvers this time around?
What made this totem journey so special is the political moment. The fact that Native grassroots political power has finally been acknowledged as a result of our historic turnout in the 2020 elections. The Lummi carvers called me and said, after the election results were in, they said, we've got to take a totem. We've got to take a totem to DC to congratulate Biden. And I said, we need to remind Biden of his ancestral responsibilities. And so we did.
Before we go further, though, I want to play a piece about the Red Road to D.C. that was created by one of the co-sponsors of the journey, an organization called the Natural History Museum, which isn't the museum you're thinking of, but you can learn more about it at our website. The piece is narrated by Lummi Tribal Council member Freddie Lane.
For the last 20 years, the House of Tears carvers of the Lummi Nation have transported totem poles around the world as a way of bringing communities together and highlighting issues. This year is our biggest journey yet. A large coalition of indigenous and non-indigenous groups have gathered and supported this project where we're driving a 25-foot totem pole across the country, stopping at many sacred and historic places under threat from dams, climate change, and resource extraction. As the totem pole moves, it carries the spirits of the land it visits. It's like a battery that charges as it travels. As people touch it, they give it power. As it moves on, it shares that power with the next community it visits. This totem pole draws lines of connection between communities fighting for the land and for the future, and against an understanding of development that has been pushing the world towards extinction. The journey will end in Washington, D.C., where it will be delivered to the Biden administration as a strong and important message. It's a reminder of the promises that were made to the first peoples of these lands and waters, and to the responsibility we all share to safeguard the sacred sources of life, earth, water, sky, for the generations to come.
People do not realize that our sacred sites are not only endangered because of fossil fuel extraction or very poor development plans, but also from climate chaos. And so everyone really has a stake in the protection of our constitutional right. But we had to remind people, and that's why we brought communities together to update where things are at in the state of play in protecting their sacred site, but also to tie them together with a red road to see how we can continue to work together to protect all sacred sites.
Crystal Echohawk is an enrolled member of the Pawnee Nation, national narrative change leader, and president and CEO of Illuminative, another co-sponsor of the Red Road to D.C.
One of the most important things about the Red Road totem pole journey, is that it originated with, a vision from the Lummi House of Tears carvers, right? And this amazing, extraordinary, totem pole. And I think the Lummi carvers really understood how much Mother Earth, right, is really deeply under threat. The totem pole journey was also just part of the grand vision of Judith LeBlanc and the Native Organizers Alliance, really connecting it with the movements on the ground and these movements to really build power. Where Illuminative got involved was understanding about, well, how do we take this up to the next level? How do we begin to really shift the narrative and help Americans understand that when Native peoples are taking a stand, whether it's No Dapple at Standing Rock or, KXL, and thinking about, the Fort Belknap, Indian community or the Rosebud Sioux Reservation, these key battles, right, that oftentimes people just think, well, that's a Native American issue, that we're defending the water and the land for tens of millions of Americans.
What shape were the indigenous communities in that you went through, that you visited?
People are up against some big, big things, right? Whether it's their state governments, federal government, major corporations, local communities. I mean, the oil and gas industry, I learned so much when I went to Chaco Canyon and just, we met at one of the Navajo chapter houses. And I remember as we were pulling in, people were telling me that oftentimes be prepared, to get headaches and to kind of feel nauseous because of the methane and the things that were being released into the air from the fracking. And just hearing the stories, horror stories of families who had been desperately harmed and their health impacted. There's devastation, but I think that people are feeling our power as Native peoples and feeling our power when we're joined by our allies. And I think we're also understanding that we're coming into a new era where we have a lot more hope with, Secretary Haaland sitting there at Interior, and we got to rejoice over the decision around Bears Ears and other things. So I think I felt like such a just inspired.
What is it that led you to focus on narrative and media representation? I understand it was a body of research that you undertook.
I've been an organizer and an activist my entire career. And I think it was just reaching a point back in kind of 2015 of just sheer frustration and constantly feeling like our issues as Native peoples were just never taken seriously and not included. And so the Reclaiming Native Truth Project, which I founded and co-led between 2016 and 2018, really looked at what are the dominant narratives in this country and how do they shape the perceptions of not only the American public, right, and the sort of diverse demographics around that, but, key institutions.
Give us some examples of the findings, maybe things that even surprised you.
There was a significant percentage of Americans, particularly, in places like the East Coast or places that don't have any proximity to reservations, that people aren't even sure if Native Americans still exist anymore. Right. As we began to kind of dive in and unpack, we began to understand that big systems such as, media, entertainment, K through 12 education, and our federal government were really these big systems that were perpetuating the erasure of Native peoples. And through that erasure, what it serves to do is to really dehumanize Native Americans, right, in the minds of many. And also when we're out of sight, out of mind, we don't get included. Yeah. And when you don't see something or hear about something, they're no longer human and they're not a priority. And we began to understand that the erasure and the stereotypes and misinformation really impacted policy and key things that impact the lives of Native Americans and tribes every single day.
Now, you've used the term ancestral responsibilities a few times. Can you talk about the actual treaty basis on which this relationship stands?
When I say ancestral responsibilities, I'm talking about our collective ancestors. Nelson Mandela is an ancestor of mine. And we all have a relationship to place, Mother Earth, where we live, where we walk, where we work, where we love. For Native people, we have a special relationship with the federal government because we are nations within this nation. And when people talk about treaty rights, it's about restoring the rights that have been denied for so long, the rights that were determined by treaties signed in exchange for land, signed because we were forced off land, signed because we were hoping to fight another day. And they remain documents that even a right-wing controlled Supreme Court continue to uphold because they're constitutionally guaranteed. But many of the rights that were established by treaty with these tribal nations are human rights: the right to healthcare from birth to death, the right to housing, the right to education. So treaty rights are an important cornerstone for achieving racial justice in the present, but in the future, they will be cornerstones for the fight for human rights, for the achievement of what the rightful role of government should be for all peoples.
By the banks of the Missouri River in South Dakota, homeland of the 7 tribes of the Oceti-Sakowin Sioux Nation, the totem journey brought people together to consider the rights of nature, a concept born out of indigenous philosophy that's gaining traction in law. Mari Margul is the executive director of the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights, which established the first rights of nature laws in the world a decade ago, and is working with communities all around the globe.
Today's environmental laws don't recognize that nature possesses any inherent right even to be, to exist. And that means that nature is treated essentially as a inanimate, not living thing, or property or commerce, and those environmental laws regulate how we use or exploit nature. So we legalize the very things that tribal nations and communities are trying to stop, such as fracking or mining or pipelines. We see the consequence. We see, of course, accelerating climate change, accelerating species extinction, accelerating ecosystem collapse with coral reefs and other ecosystems. And so with that, we're beginning to see sort of a new understanding, a shift in consciousness, if you will, that something really fundamental needs to change. It's not about making these existing environmental laws better. It's about changing our basic relationship with the natural world, human Western relationship with the natural world, which means changing how we govern ourselves toward nature, but also changing how nature itself is treated under the law, from being this inanimate, dead thing, property, to becoming rights-bearing.
Anaquet, or Guy Ryder, is a member of the Menominee Indian tribe of Wisconsin.
The Menominee River separates the state of Wisconsin and upper Michigan, creates a natural border, but more importantly, that's where our people come from. We've been trying to fight this Canadian company on all facets of everything we could possibly challenge. We've been challenging. We try to incorporate our identity into our strategy. And the other thing I think is very important is just paying attention to our earth and watching how animals, the strategies they take to protect their home or protect their young ones, we want to use those, we want to utilize those same strategies because obviously they're successful or they wouldn't be here. I think rights of nature give us an opportunity to take that sort of understanding, to take that sort of approach and put it into a legal framework that hopefully we can use to help defend some of our sacred areas. We're going to keep that momentum and carry that, and go from stop to stop and gather all that good medicine and leave good medicine, and hopefully when we get to D.C. that we'll have legitimate consultation and we'll have legitimate talks with some of the leadership there.
This is the Laura Flanders Show. I'm Laura. That was Anaquet, or Guy Ryder, Executive Director of the Menacana Kome Community Rebuilders and a member of the Menominee Nation. Also with him, Mari Margell, Executive Director of the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. I spoke with both on the banks of the Missouri River, one of the stops on the Red Road to D.C. You can watch this episode about the trip of the Lummi Nation carvers totem pole from Washington State to Washington, D.C. on our television program on over 300 public television stations around the country or at our YouTube channel. All the details are at lauraflanders.org. While you're there, sign up for our weekly newsletter to get information on all our web events and audio exclusives, including all my uncut interviews and commentaries. Next, Judith LeBlanc talks about the potential the Red Road journey holds to foster new sorts of relationships between the U.S. government and Native nations. We'll also hear from Deb Haaland, U.S. Secretary of the Interior and member of the Laguna Pueblo tribe, and Faith Spotted Eagle, Ayanktanwin, Dakota Elder, and Braveheart Society Kunzi member. Faith was speaking at the National Mall, but right in front of the Capitol, when tribal leaders, indigenous people, and their allies gathered for the arrival of the totem pole. Before all that, though, here's Miracle by Superman, featuring Maimuna Yusuf, a member of the Apsaluki Nation, from his album Illumi Natives.
We need a blessing tonight. Stand by our side as we fight. Screaming out water and light. Hey, yo, all around the world, my sisters and my brothers hurt. So I start this verse with a heartbeat of Mother Earth. I say a prayer and put it down for what it's worth. For those who oppose and only see color first. My two sons, my daughter and wife, and the father of lights. I started the fight, startering mics, ready to die like a martyr tonight. With my fist to the sky, saying water is life. And yo, it takes a nation of millions to hold us back. This is treaty land. We see these scams, they only know the facts. Evil collapses and cowers in fear. The hour is near. Let the world unite with the power of prayer. Yeah, our family rise, defy gravity. We gon' keep on rhyming and climbing and shine happily. A masterpiece. Put my whole body glistening. Hey yo, we still here, is it ready? Funny listening. From Flint, Michigan to my Egyptian friends, Minnesota, all around.
This Red Road has special potential in these days. That was something that I took away from the totem journey. And it has to do with the potential of that U.S. federal Native nation relationship. In the middle of that sits Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, to whom you brought the totem with its messages gathered from across the country. Can you talk about that meeting, the significance of Deb, and what do you mean when you say you're looking for a new grounding for this relationship in the 21st century? Judith LeBlanc, Executive Director, the Native Organizers Alliance.
Right now, it's a suggestion. It's an executive order that departments of the government should consult with tribes. The history of consultation, starting with the Clinton administration, is that it's something that's suggested, and many departments just check the box by sending an email. It's become weaponized, the idea of consultation. They listen, and then they go back to DC and make a decision that's potentially very damaging. So alongside of the protection of all sacred sites, we began a popular education campaign on the right to be at the decision-making table and to achieve, therefore, the standards set by the UN, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which outlines the fact that nations should relate to indigenous nations as equals and ensure prior informed consent on all decisions that affect our lives. We believe this is the next logical step if we are truly to reckon with the systemic racism in the history of this country.
When the totem pole arrived in Washington, D.C., indigenous people and their allies gathered on the National Mall in front of the Capitol, probably the biggest such gathering in modern times. Tribal leaders from across the country rose to the podium to bring their people's messages to the federal government. Among those was Faith Spotted Eagle, longtime activist, Ayanktanwin Dakota Elder, and Braveheart Society Kunzi member.
At this point, more of us need to come together in a very organized, best method of all, to ask for co-management of these areas. So we have to go over to that house and be constantly involved and support the tribal relative, our matrilineal leader, Haaland, because she's not going to be able to do all those things that we're asking her of. So that leaves it to us on the ground in the front line. Everyone in Congress is a treaty signer. We have to pass that word and make them accountable that they signed those treaties as a citizen of this nation, and it has to be enforced.
The meeting with the Secretary of the Interior was historic. Tribal elected leaders, traditional leaders, and grassroots community organizers met with the Secretary of the Interior to bring the messages that had been at the heart of this initiative, but to also bring her up to date of what's going on in the places where this work is going on, and to let her know she's not alone.
United States Secretary of the Interior and member of the Laguna Pueblo tribe, Deb Haaland.
Because we're coming together in a new era, an era of truth, of healing, of growth, an era in which our Indigenous knowledge is valued and respected, in which Indigenous leadership has a seat at the table to make decisions about our communities, in which we have an opportunity to rise above the challenges our people face and build a brighter future for all of us.
You're celebrating Secretary Haaland, but at the same time in this season, people will have seen significant protest by Native Americans outside her office. Can you help us understand this?
Representation is important. It's critical, but it's not the destination. And now we continue to organize at the grassroots level around those issues that are of concern and are housed within the framework of the Department of the Interior. I think that protest people were feeling that with line 3 and that they had reached the end of the road. But we're seeing Deb's presence in that department as being a very powerful motivator to begin the change, structural reforms that we need.
You participated in an Indigenous Futures survey that I would love you to talk about, because it spoke to some of what I imagine were the hopes and dreams that people put on the totem as they were invited to by the Lummi carvers as it traveled across the country. Crystal Echohawk, Illuminative founder and CEO.
It was a national survey of about 6,400 people from all 50 states representing 401 tribes. I think what we heard, top issues for Native people in this country as we think about right now in the future are things like protecting missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and members of the LGBTQ and Two-Spirited community. Environmental concerns are a major issue, as well as language and cultural revitalization and mental health and access to quality healthcare. I think we also heard a lot resoundingly from Native peoples that we're tired of the erasure. We're tired of the way that we get portrayed in the media and our lack of representation. And so I think this is why more and more you see more organizing across this country. And now we have these breakthrough moments, like we now have 2 amazing Native TV shows that are critically acclaimed and really successful. And we're starting to see all kinds of different representations. And we saw, based on the survey last year, right prior to the election, that in the previous, major election in 2018, that we had more than 70% of Native people reporting that they voted. And then you see in 2020 what an impact our people had. And so I think that, it's an exciting time. And the more that we can amplify contemporary Native voices and issues, especially as we look ahead to the midterm elections and the next presidential in 2024, that Native peoples are going to continue to have a major impact in this country.
I think we're speaking at the very beginning of November, which is Native American History Month. And I put in Native American History Month in my Google search bar and got quite a surprise. Is that your work?
No, I think it's collective work. I mean, we definitely have had good relationships with Google, but I think what I love is that there's just been growing momentum over the last couple years around the work that Illuminative and so many of us do across Indian country to really promote our visibility, to really invite people in, to really learn about who we are today.
Is there any last comment you'd like to leave us with about the tools perhaps that exist at your website or elsewhere that might help people of all sorts do better at this work?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to encourage people to follow Illuminative on social media. We are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and we, such a core part of our mission is about educating and building relationships with allies. So people will find all kinds of wonderful information. We're calling you in and not calling you out. Books to read, films, latest, contemporary issues. And so we just really invite people to not only follow us and to lean in and learn, but just to really start to think about how can you be a good ally in your own community and the places that you work and live.
Tell us where you think we are in progress from that old myth that white people, colonizers, developed of the grateful colonized person, and where we need to go, where the red road might take us.
Thanksgiving is a time when people get together and have good food. I know some Indians don't celebrate. I love to get together with people and have good food and talk about what's gone on in our lives. That's a beautiful thing. But the truth is that the myth of Thanksgiving is being busted wide open. People are questioning. That's the first step towards healing and towards political change. I think Thanksgiving is one of those days that will continue to be good meals and great football, and also a time of thinking about community and thinking about history. And we're hoping this Thanksgiving that people take a look at what has happened in this country when it comes to reckoning with the systemic racism that's been a constant thread since the beginning of time, and also begin to recognize that Native people have not only a role to play, but are a necessary ingredient to solving many of the problems. And we bring medicine, we bring the idea that we're all in relationship. An Indigenous framework is about understanding that relationship and putting that relationship in balance, be it with the natural world or with each other. So I hope Thanksgiving is a time when people reflect on how it is that they can be good relatives, not only with Indigenous people, but with all of their neighbors and all of the people who, especially at this moment, are suffering and are in of crisis.
For more information on this week's guests, along with a suggested reading list and links to related episodes to explore, check out our episode notes posted at patreon.com/The LF Show. That's also where you'll find an invitation to watch the premiere of each week's show on our YouTube channel and chat live in real time with me, Sundays, 11:30 a.m. Eastern. The show is listener-supported thanks to you. It's our members who have kept this show available to listeners and viewers for free for 4 years. But it takes a lot of funds to keep the show airing nationally. We don't take corporate or government underwriting. We rely on you. So go to patreon.com/The LF Show and join our team by becoming a patron, by giving whatever you can afford once a month, or find more ways to donate at lauraflanders.org/donate. Thanks for listening. This show is produced by yours truly, Laura Flanders, along with Sabrina Artel, Nat Needham, David Newman, Rory O'Connor, Alicia Duque, Jeanette Hernandez, and Jeannie Hopper. Major funding for this program is provided by the Novo, Park, Ellen Poss Family, Hisuku Wilson Foundations, the Schumann Media Center, Rising Fund at Tides, Kim Connor and Nick Groombridge, Jane Fonda, and listeners like you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for contributing. Thanks for your ideas. Stay kind, stay curious. Until the next time, I'm Laura.